Ντάγκλας Μακρέγκορ, Σκοτ Ρίτερ και άλλοι της ίδιας επαγγελματικής φύσεως τονίζουν εδώ και καιρό ότι ο πόλεμος Ουκρανία-Ρωσία έχει κρυφθεί, αλλά προ-ορών πέρασαν τεθωρακισμένα οχήματα οι Ουκρανοί σε κύρια απόβαση στη νότια όχθη του Δνήπερου και μάλιστα σε προγεφύρωμα που φυλασσόταν πλημελώς από τους Ρώσους. Θα υπάρξει ειδικό ρεπορτάζ. Σημασία έχει ότι ο Ντάγκλας Μακρέγκορ τονίζει ότι και τουρκικά στρατεύματα ενδέχεται να πολεμήσουν στη Γάζα. Τέος, σύμβουλος του Υπουργού Άμυνας στην κυβέρνηση Τραμπ, ανώτερος συνεργάτης του περιοδικού The American Conservative. Δείτε το συνταγματάρχη Μακρέγκορ τι αναλύει, ειδικά για Τουρκία.
We're headed in that direction, and it doesn't appear that anyone in Washington is interested in halting the rush into disaster.
Was one of Hamas's goals on October 7th to induce an Israeli overreaction so as to coalesce Arab animosity in the region against it?
Well, it's not unreasonable to make that point, but we haven't talked to anyone in Hamas. We don't know what their thinking happens to be, but if that wasn't their intention, it certainly turned out to be that way.
Is the Israeli military walking into a trap by attempting to wage a land war in a place as treacherous, as urban, as filled with tunnels and old buildings as Gaza is?
I think so. I would say on many levels. If we go back to the summer of last year, when the war in Ukraine was changing or evolving, and the world's eyes were fixed almost exclusively on what was happening there, had the Israelis confronted Hamas at that point, I think the Israelis would have had an easier time waging this sort of ruthless, scorched earth campaign against Hamas than they have right now. It's simply a function of the fact that the world is not looking at Ukraine because the world knows the truth. The war in Ukraine is effectively over. The losses and the destruction in Ukraine are horrendous. Ukrainians can't do much about it. So everyone is focused now on Israel and Hamas, and they're seeing things that upset them. You cannot broadcast the pictures of dead children being carried out of the rubble in Gaza without expecting some sort of horrendous national reaction out of each of the Arab states and from the so-called Arab street. So that's definitely part of it. And on another level, I think that the region is increasingly coalescing into this alliance that might have otherwise never occurred. There's a readiness to take action. There's no doubt about it against the Israelis. And we, again, are the loyal, obedient servants of Mr. Netanyahu and his government.
I'm sure that that's the way he feels, and of course that is the way we behave. Back to Erdogan. Are his rantings and ravings before 1 million people, whatever the size of that crowd was, to be taken as for domestic political purposes or in preparation for support for military activity?
Both. There's no question about it. I think both are accurate. Mr. Erdogan is a clever, manipulative politician, if ever there was one. But he's also a very powerful nationalist in the Turkish sense and widely respected inside his country, and for nothing else, his strength in leading Turkey. In fact, you could say that in many ways, he's regarded by many of the Turks in this sense as a strong leader, the way many Israelis regarded Mr. Netanyahu. So I think he's deadly serious. And for the Turks to hold these meetings with the Iranians in public, they've always had meetings privately from time to time, but for these meetings to be so public is a very, very important signal to the world.
Why do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't take note of this, or if he takes note of it, isn't acting upon it? I mean, my view is that his situation politically at home is so precarious, he only stays in office for as long as the war is being waged. The minute the war is over, he's out of office and maybe out of freedom. If Iran and Turkey are cooking something up, and with Erdogan riling up the masses, Netanyahu ought to take note of it and perhaps do something like pull the troops back or let humanitarian aid in. So my question is, if there's a ceasefire, who wins or who's perceived as winning?
You know, I don't know that there will be any winners if there is an immediate ceasefire. In other words, something happens right away. It'll take time to sort out, but I think whatever happens will work to Israel's disadvantage strategically. And I think Mr. Netanyahu, and by the way, I haven't met him, I don't know him, I've read other people's assessments, but I can't evaluate him personally. But I think that he is a ferocious fighter for Israel, there's no question about that. But I also think he's got us in a position where I think he believes this is the time to leverage American national power to try and settle accounts, if he can do it, with his neighbors. And he is focused on that almost to the exclusion of everything else. We are giving him unconditional support on the assumption that he is going to be successful, that he will go in, root out Hamas, destroy the place, and that he can get that done before anything else happens. And we put our forces there as a stopgap measure in the event that Hezbollah attacks. I think it will. I don't know what the timing it will be, but I think they ultimately will do that so that we can distract Hezbollah from interfering with what Mr. Netanyahu is trying to do further south. And I think that's it. I think that's all there is right now. And many Israelis have complained that they don't see any other strategic end state other than Hamas is destroyed and Gaza is in ruins. And that's not, by the way, that's not the kind of strategic end state that you want unless you want another war.
Τόνισε ότι δεν γνωρίζει τον Νετανιάχου προσωπικά, αλλά επιδιώκει να επιτύχει ό,τι πέτυχαν οι δυνάμεις τον Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο κατά Γερμανίας ή Ιαπωνίας. Βοήθεια της Δύσεως, αυτό επιδιώκει ο Νετανιάχου σήμερα. Να κλείσει όλους τους λογαριασμούς, αλλά ίσως γίνει και το αντίθετο. Δείτε, δεν αφήνει ούτε για 48 ώρες να περάσει ανθρωπιστική βοήθεια, καύσιμα και άλλα. Έχει πετύχει και αυτό. Σουνίτες ή Ιτές εναντίον του. Κάτι που δεν περίμενε κανείς να συναθριστούν τούτο τρόπος. Και σήμερα ο Ερντογκάν βρίσκεται στο Ιράν. Κατευθείαν μετά την προσβολή ο Φιντάν έφτασε στην Τεχεράνη. Τελικά ο Μπλίνκεν κρατά άδειο καλάθι σήμερα και δεν πέρασε ποτέ από Κρήτη. Είναι ψέματα και δεν διορθώνουν τα συστημικά που σας το λένε. Απλώς τηλεφώνημα είχε ο Μητσοτάκης. Όποιον τον έχει σίγουρο δεν του αφιερώνεις χρόνο. Για κρυμμένες ειδήσεις έγκαιρη και έγκυρη ενημέρωση εγγράψου, κοινοποίησε να το γνωρίσουν όλοι. Η αλήθεια πάση θυσία εδώ.